welcome to my third video on the modules that I'm learning in my Masters in Psychology, and a quick review of what I've studied this week. So we'll start off with biological psychology. So this week we actually learned about PTSD, depression and anxiety, as well as schizophrenia as well. We learned about it from different angles. So we looked at the neuroanatomy elements of it, we also looked at treatments, and we also looked at symptoms. So if I start with the neuroanatomy aspect, I guess one area that is covered is the fact that mental health conditions and mental health illnesses they are genetic. There's a genetic component, and there's also an environmental component as well. So if we take the case of PTSD, so what's happening there, essentially you have the amygdala, which is in your brain, and that's kind of like the fight or flight response, and it kind of like generates fear. And then you have the hippocampus, which is meant to kind of regulate and reduce cortisol and help you calm down. So for somebody who has PTSD, anxiety or depression, what has been found is that sometimes they may have a smaller hippocampus, which actually makes it difficult for them to be able to regulate, to be able to kind of manage their stress levels. And as well as that, the kind of like the frontal pre-cortex, I know I've said it wrong, but essentially the front part of your brain where it helps regulate emotions might not be responding or being able to kind of like do its job properly, essentially, which means that individuals might have these symptoms for longer periods, or just struggle to kind of process it on their own. From a treatment perspective, so therapy has been proven to actually help people increase the capacity around this kind of like prefrontal cortex that essentially allows them to get better at regulating their emotions. As well as that, there are also antidepressants which people can take, which can increase the density of the hippocampus, which will allow them to then improve and be able to manage kind of like a lot of the negative emotions, or to manage their stress a lot better. So this is on a case by case, because obviously antidepressants are also known to have effects, and depending on who you are, depending on your history, depending on kind of like your life factors, it can affect people in different ways, which means that sometimes people don't respond to antidepressants quite well, and they actually don't get to see the therapeutic benefits, which can take about 6 to 8 weeks to develop. So it was really interesting to kind of like look at the treatments component. It was also good to look at like the brain and how it's actually functioning and what's happening when somebody has symptoms of PTSD, which can include flashbacks, so like remunerating. It can also include kind of being associating certain smells, names, places to the memories and the places that have been attached to trauma, and depression and anxiety can obviously fall off the back of that as well. We looked at depression and other components of depression, whether it's general or whether it's something more severe, such as like bipolar or like mania depression as well. We looked at anxiety and actually how anxiety is stored and how it's generated, and some of the ways that people can, I guess from the central nervous system, you have the sympathetic, which creates all of the kind of like stress, fight or flight, and it's connected to kind of like your digestion and other parts of your bodies and so on. And then we also looked at the parasympathetic, which is responsible more for calming and kind of like regulating cortisol and regulating stress. So ultimately, if you have PTSD, or if you're struggling with anxiety and depression, you want to do stuff that's going to activate the parasympathetic element of your body, rather than the sympathetic, which is linked to the flight or fight response. So that was what we learned in biological psychology. And to move on, so I guess next I'm going to talk through historical psychology. So this week we was looking at the theory of behaviourism, which was developed by Watson. So his whole aspect was to look at people's behaviour rather than just internal mental processes, such as Freud had previously suggested. So he would run experiments which were influenced by other behaviourist, psychologists that had come before him. But what he was really trying to understand was how people's behaviours then affected how they conducted themselves. So we looked at the example of little Albert, who essentially was placed in a environment, and within that environment he was calm, presented with a rabbit, and then after that he was then presented with a big bang, and then following the big bang he was then represented with the rabbit without the bang. But at that point he started crying because when he saw the rabbit, because he associated the rabbit with the bang. So this was some of the responses that he had essentially gathered from the different experiments that had been conducted on him, and some of this can be seen as like classical conditioning or operating conditioning. So classical conditioning is essentially the theory that we do stuff. So an example could be, seeing a green light and walking. So you then associate green light with walking, or green light with starting your engine, or green light with riding your bike. And then there's operating conditioning, where there's more of a reward or a punishment that's attached to it. So it could be that, for example, going to the gym and knowing that after you go to the gym you feel like a lot of endorphins and you feel really good, and that's like a reward for yourself. Or it could be being told to sit on a naughty spot if you haven't done your homework, as part of like a punishment. So all of these are different types of aspects of behaviourism that we do as a society. And it has also shaped a lot of developmental psychology, particularly around children, education, and is still widely kind of like spoken about and looked at in society today. And then finally, cognitive psychology. This week we looked at attention. So we looked at attention across a whole range. So from one, we looked at kind of like limited attention, selective attention, so how you can kind of choose where you place your attention, divided attention, multitasking, and whether that's effective. And the answer is no, but I'm sure we all know that right now trying to do two things at the same time doesn't always have the best results, and it's even more difficult if you're using the same senses. So you couldn't watch two movies at the same time, just as you couldn't read two books at the same time. But you could potentially watch a movie and read a book at the same time, but your attention is divided, so essentially we're just getting more of it. We also looked at how attention can be implemented in, everyday parts of the world. So if we take branding, so we looked at single features, how you can essentially use a color or a shape to associate with a product, and then you can add other elements such as like conjunctive search, which can be text, it could be fonts, but it could be how to make the product unique and how to differentiate so that people can associate that particular product with whatever message or brand that you're trying to put across. So it could be, a great example would be like Coca-Cola. So obviously Coca-Cola is red, and then you also have the font as well, which is really unique and is associated to Coca-Cola. So that's about to grab somebody's attention so that they know, yes, that's Coca-Cola. So that kind of wraps up this week, and this is just kind of like top level stuff of what I've learned. I hope it's been useful. I'll be back next week with the fourth installment to share more of what I've learned in my master's in psychology. If you're enjoying it, then please subscribe and stay part of the journey. Thank you.